My name's Diana Hernandez. I'm a student and I'm very interested in this movement. But one question that I have is, seems a little unrelated, but with this idea of like SOPA and PIPA and all these acts that the government's trying to pass that will censor the internet, it is for copyright purposes, but this kind of proposes this sort of threat that says, you know, we can control even down to social media. And a lot with this movement, considering that the news is only showing the violence that is going on in, for example, Oakland. It only publicizes the violence, doesn't really spread that message that they're trying to spread. There is a message. But do you think that with this idea that the government is trying to censor, even if it's, you know, legal, does that affect anything at all what this movement is about?
I could just start off the conversation by pointing out that this movement started through an initiative from Adbusters, which is this progressive magazine operating out of Vancouver, Canada. And basically, this crazy guy, what's his name? He's not crazy, he's awesome. Hassan basically said he was observing everything that was happening across the Middle East and North Africa and said, we need to reinvigorate our democratic process here. And so he said, let's do an Occupy thing. And he basically, through a lot of different internet communities, started, many of them anarchist communities, anarcho-syndicalists, different sort of just progressive voices across really North America. He said, let's get this going, and then they selected a date, and they figured out that New York would be the place to do it. And it was all through, you know, social media. And so SOPA doesn't directly target social media, but it could profoundly affect it, because insofar as those means of communication are reduced, it just means that it's that much harder for people to communicate their ideas and share those symbols. Maybe half of the symbols I showed are probably copyrighted, but that's how you generate, you know, because you can copyright anything these days. So that's how you generate enthusiasm. So yeah, I think it's a valid concern, and that's why I think we need to be really vigilant about it.
I think also the last part of your question asking about how the media portrays the violence that is oftentimes seen. I mean, it seems like the mainstream media just can't resist showing scenes of certain kinds of violence. But one way to think about this is not to think about whether or not that's disturbing or what that might tell us one way or the other about the Occupy movement or any kind of social movement. Draw a parallel with it. Think about the way in which, for example, when the United States or other European powers engage in military intervention for a just cause, some kind of humanitarian intervention, there is always what is known as collateral damage. There are always these unintended consequences. There, the response is, that's unfortunate. However, given that we're doing such good work here, that's just something that we're going to have to absorb. It's remarkable, though, that when it comes to democratic politics, there's this insistence that it must be neat, it must be clean, it must be pure, it must be above board, it must be all these things. But democratic politics at times does get messy. And so that's not an advocation or advocacy in any way for breaking bank windows or something like that. But if something like that does happen, I think it's a sign that we don't necessarily think well about politics, that we get as upset as we do, and we think that that automatically discredits the movement itself. And again, that's not to say that it's above criticism or above reproach, but it needs to be put in a certain kind of perspective. That's what I would suggest.
My question is just, participants of the movement, what have they offered as far as solutions or suggestions to get the American people more involved in politics other than electing the president?
So, in preparing for this panel, I sort of self-educated on the movement. There's one of the things that I'm sort of coming to understand about the Occupy movement, that the purpose of occupying a public space is to engage in disruptive action and call attention to the grievances, but it's also to literally occupy that public space and create a space for discussion. And so one example would be that at these Occupy encampments, there's constant conversation about political issues. There are constant meetings trying to plan next steps, other action items, right? At the Gallivan Plaza, you're free to drop in at the Gallivan Plaza, and then 24/7, there's people there that you can ask what's going on, what can I do next, how can I get involved. There's, in this regrouping of the movement, people are thinking exactly about this, right? And one article that I read, one of the organizers said that the goals of the movement are to educate, empower, and encourage direct political participation, right? And so part of it is educating, just coming together in groups and talking and thinking about some of the issues that we are raising, right? What does it mean to live in a democratic society? What does it mean to for a government to be truly representative? What can I do about it? And then, so specifically, there's this movement, for example, it's called Occupy Elections, is to encourage you to not go camp out overnight at Pioneer Park, but to become a delegate in your party's, whether it's Republican or Democrat, in your party's convention, because that's, particularly in Utah, right? I mean, we all know, it doesn't matter who you vote for, November, whatever, right, the first Tuesday, right? A Republican's going to win, right, whatever election, and the delegates are going to go to whoever the Republican candidate is, right, the Electoral College votes. So if you really want to determine who wins in the general election, if you're a Republican, you should get involved in the caucuses, right? And so Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Salt Lake is encouraging people to get involved in the primary and caucuses process in their state, in their city, whatever that process is, right? Because that's where you have more power. That would be one specific example. And I think these are going to emerge, as time goes on, so different opportunities to participate.
We have 4 minutes remaining in the recorded portion of this 4 minutes.